Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Brené Brown. You are listening to the Real Estate Investor Show, episode number 28.
Welcome, ladies, to the Real Estate Investor Show, providing inspiration, strategies, and insight to empower women investors to live balanced and financially free lives. Now, here are your co-hosts, Liz and Andressa.
On today's show, we have one of the most respected women in real estate investing, Fettke, who is the co-founder of the Real Wealth Network, a California-based real estate investment group with over 39,000 members. She is a regular guest expert on CNBC, Fox, ABC, and Bloomberg News, and author of Retire Rich with Rentals. On today's phenomenal interview, we explore how to find the best market to invest in, raising private money, syndications, crowdfunding, and what makes women investors stand apart. Welcome back, ladies. This is Liz.
And this is Andressa.
And you're back with on the Real Estate Investor Show. We're delighted to be back with you this week. We are honored to have Kathy. How are you doing, Kathy, on our show?
I am doing wonderful. I had a great morning.
That's wonderful. And we're going to hear about Kathy and her fantastic background. She's got such a wealth of knowledge and experience. We're really excited and thrilled to have her on our show. But as we do, we'd like to kind of get connected with all of you listening and the ladies listening. And just I wanted to quickly share of, the whole idea of working on your business versus just working in it. And my husband and I have a standing monthly business meeting where we go through our goals and talk about what's working, what's not. And we've blown off this meeting the last 2 months because quote unquote, we're too busy,
Life happens.
Life happens. And we're just like, oh, we're too busy. And today we met and we're like, and he's going away to Europe. So we had to meet today and just to talk about a few things. And some new awarenesses came up, some new goals we have set for the rest of the year. And it made me think after the meeting, I was like, you know what? You can't put off the important but not urgent meetings, especially like working on your business. And some awarenesses came up from this meeting today that wouldn't have come up had we just been in the day-to-day grind of making our goals happen. So just want to remind the ladies listening, don't ever compromise on those important but not urgent, meetings. So especially where you're regrouping on your goals.
That's such a great point. I was actually talking to a friend of mine, young guy, working his butt off to gain new clients. He's very successful for the short period of time that he's been in the business. And he was saying, I've been working, 6 out of 7 days of the week and all of that. And I was like, but what's the time that you're working on the business itself, not just answering calls and putting up with fires. So we had that conversation this week, and it's so important really to prioritize that time to double check your progress, right? You gotta see how, and really, pat yourself on the back.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just wanted to give a quick reminder of that. So with further ado, I want to jump into our fantastic here guest. Again, Kathy, just thanks for being on our show. And as we do with all of our guests and the ladies listening, we'd love to hear a woman's journey of how they began, not just investing, but how they get pulled into this business. It's a crazy business, which I'm sure you'll be attest to with your background and all the experience you have. So, what compelled you to get involved in real estate investing? And that's a great place for us to start.
Sure. Well, I have my husband is a motivational speaker, I guess, although he doesn't like calling himself that, but a business and personal coach. He's now my co-CEO at Real Wealth Network. But what you said earlier, I just had to add, if you don't put it in your calendar, it won't happen. So just sit down, do it quarterly, and get those planning meetings and with your staff, with your company, with your family, your vacations. Honestly, like my husband took my daughter's ex-boyfriend rock climbing last weekend. She's like, what? Why didn't you take me, Dad? It's like, oh, it wasn't in the calendar. So anyway, I was like, you guys sit down and plan your daddy-daughter time because it won't happen. Time goes so quickly. But anyway,
that is true.
Back in 2012, Rich had just come out with his book called Extreme Success, and he was touring the country. He had a New York publisher who was billing him as the next Tony Robbins. He got with the highest advance that any kind of new author had received. And things were just wonderful. We just bought a big new house, and I had 2 little kids. I was a stay-at-home mom after having a busy career of my own. But I wanted to stay home with the kids. So really, I was living the dream. Really, literally, it was a white house with a white picket fence, and 2 perfect kids and a perfect husband. And then he came home after being on the road. He had just come back from an interview in New York, and he said, I just noticed some freckles, and I should go check those. So he's a redhead. He has a million freckles. I have no idea how he knew this freckle was special, but he went to check it. It turns out it was melanoma. Further tests showed that it had possibly spread. They did more tests. It looked like it spread to his liver. And at that point, the doctor said, you probably have 6 months. Wow. And so, you can be at the top of your game. You can, everything can go amazing until it doesn't. Mm. And those are moments that you just really can't prepare for. We had kind of prepared financially by putting aside 10% of our income in savings, 10% into, retirement, and then 10% into kind of a slush fund for fun things to do and stuff. So we were following our financial planner's advice, and, we thought we were doing things right, but I cannot tell you how quickly you can burn through that with medical bills. So here we were at the top of our game, and suddenly just struggling. There was no way he was going to be traveling around the country promoting his book, if he only had 6 months. I mean, it's really a great question. Like, what would you do if you only had 6 months? So I thought, okay, I'm going to figure out how to make money. You stay home with the kids. We had, young kids. Do what you want, enjoy your life, But I totally didn't believe it. Not at all. So I was right. And the doctor was wrong. He's been cured. He's fine. It's, fast forward, I guess, 15 years or so. And he's as healthy as can be. He just got back from rock climbing in Yosemite, thousands of feet up. So he's healthy and great today. But at the time, I had to figure out how to support our family and give him the time he needed. I had a radio show that I had been doing. I've been in broadcasting most of my life. Still had this radio show in San Francisco. That was, it was okay. I was kind of just interviewing people that I thought were interesting, but it didn't have a theme. And suddenly it had a theme, and that theme was like making money. How do I make money as a stay-at-home mom? Because the last thing I was going to do, if the doctor was right, was, after kids would go through such a horrible tragedy, to then also have their mom go to work all day and never be around. So I was like, okay, there's got to be a way to make money at home, and ideally passively. So I just changed the content of my show, which is still here today, the Real Wealth Show, to, how do you make money? Like, it was just a foreign concept, one that I didn't really care that much to learn about before. I just liked doing careers that I liked, like news and reporting, and I did some modeling and, just stuff that I enjoyed. But all of a sudden it was like, no, this is about money. How do I make money? And that's what I did every day. I just started interviewing people on my show who had created wealth from nothing. And it came down to real estate and owning a business. So we did both.
That's great. So from the interviews to your first real estate deal, how did that look like?
Well, our first deal was before this, and it was totally and completely by accident. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's really expensive now, like the most expensive place in the country, maybe the world, but definitely the country. But it always has been really, really expensive. So we had no idea how we would ever buy a house. We'd been renters. But my dad had been not the most educated real estate guy. He would buy a house to live in, and it would make money because it was in California. And then he invested in some apartment in Marin, but it turns out that area ended up not being a good area, and the managers kind of just drove this apartment into the ground, and they sold it, and he had been depreciating it for years, and all of a sudden, right when he was about to retire, he got a notice in the mail saying, "Oh, we sold the building," and he would have had to pay all the back taxes, all the recapture of the depreciation he had taken, and it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he would not have been able to retire. So I was like, explain this to me. I didn't know anything about real estate. And this is 20 years ago. So I was like, explain, what do you need? And he goes, I just need to find another property. And I'm like, Why is that hard? I'm a renter. How about I just rent it and eventually own it? And so we talked to the CPA and the attorney. This is a big lesson here. Anytime you do any kind of financial transaction with real estate, always check first with a CPA, always check with an attorney, because there's things you may not know. And in this case, there were a lot of things we learned that, yes, we would take all this burden off my dad. We would live in the replacement property. He'd never have to worry about it. We'd cover all expenses, all repairs, everything. And then someday we'd inherit it. And so that was the agreement we had. Another really important point, my husband put it in the family trust, this agreement, because when he passed, believe me, the other siblings wanted to know how I got the deal. Now, this offer went out to all the kids. I was the only one who jumped on it, but that house ended up making $1 million. And so by the time my dad passed away, we inherited the house. It was stepped up to market value. There was no back taxes. They were wiped away. We owned it and we had $1 million. So that if we didn't have that in the family trust, that would have been split with the siblings for sure. So anytime you're doing deals with family, get it in writing, you have an attorney draft it and record it in the family trust. So that is really how we initially got that house. But then, so that was our first deal. And then because it made so much money, and because by now I had been interviewing people on the Real Wealth Show, I learned that we could refinance, take some of that cash out and go buy in Texas. So we bought like 12 properties in Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things your company does, where they, but in other words, making money in one part of the country and investing it in a different part. And we're, talking about the economy. And Justin and I was sharing with you, we got back from this conference, and the first speaker that spoke at this conference, Mid-Atlantic Summit few months ago, was an economist. And, he kind of like got you a little nervous, but, just in terms of where things are headed and what's potentially happening. So just again, being careful, but that's something that you have such an expertise on. So how did you know? So I'm curious, you pivoted, you did really well in California. How did you choose Texas? Or how did you make that move so you could feel confident in a new area that was unknown to you, clear that was the right area? I mean, how did you know it was a good area? It
was my show. I just like you have an opportunity to interview people that maybe have more experience than you. So at the time, I didn't have any experience. I didn't know anything about anything. So I'm not going to take credit. The only credit I will give myself is a desperate desire for knowledge, and to get that knowledge from experts, people who were doing it, versus at the time there was just what today is, a genuine real estate investment group. Back then, they were only out to get your money. I'm telling you, there was nobody out there looking out for you. It was like month after month. It was people that would come and sell boot camps, and the way that the real estate club would make their money is on 50% of that. So there was nobody out there really sharing what, like legit stuff that. And a lot of these speakers weren't even investors, they were just selling product.
It blows my mind sometimes when I still meet somebody that you're teaching something that you don't do it. How?
It's amazing. And that's just kind of how it was back then. I think now there's more ways to find out who's for real. Obviously, it's a lot easier with the internet. But there wasn't then. So anyway, I sort of broke through that and started to expose these people by bringing on real investors, and I had Robert Kiyosaki on. I was very lucky because I was on KSFO, which is a really big San Francisco station, so I could pretty much get anyone on the show. And he said, sell everything in California. These loans are insane. Nobody will be able to pay them back. I knew that because by then I had become a loan broker, and I knew how ridiculous the loans were. So he said, when it comes time for these people to have to pay, they won't be able to. But Texas, so he said, basically the prices in California are inflated simply because of these loans, because anyone could get a loan, so that drives prices up. But whereas Texas was more strict with their lending laws, and also it wasn't a hot market yet. It was only hot for people who knew what to look for. And Robert Kiyosaki knew what to look for. It was job growth and population growth and affordability. These are the three things that today I look for. Where the jobs going, because where the jobs are is where the people are going. But if those jobs are in markets that are already unaffordable, it's kind of tough to get the cash flow. But in Texas, you have this crazy combination of massive job growth, massive population growth, and home prices that were 26% undervalued. So that was my first exposure to, okay, the media is always talking about the housing market, and there is no housing market because California was at the peak of the peak of the peak, and Texas was down here.
Right.
So you could sell at the peak, exchange, and buy, 4, 5, 6 times what you had, and increase your cash flow by that much. So that's where I got the idea, and I did it. And I talked about it on my show, and then all my listeners wanted to do it. And so I started referring them to this agent. And then I thought, wait, I am sending this agent a lot of business. I think she should pay me. And that's when I learned, there's a thing called referral fees. And that's how my business started. Is like, okay, I'm a licensed real estate agent. They're licensed. They can pay me a portion of their broker fee. That's how our Real Wealth Network started.
Nice. So you mentioned about how you look at a market, right? Is there a way, besides, of course, getting the sources online, that folks that are listening to us can look at their own market and say, hey, something is up here? What are some tips that they can see that a recession or a plateau is coming?
Well, I think the safest bet in your specific market is to look at affordability levels. And so don't just look at price gains, because that doesn't tell you very much. Look at a market like Denver. Denver, if you look at the price gains, I mean, they've never had such a booming market, but they've also never had an economy like they have today. So it's just a different world. The same with Seattle. I mean, it's a different place than it used to be. Dallas, Houston, they have had total transformation. So of course their home prices aren't going to be anywhere near where they were at the last peak. So you kind of got to just get that out of your mind. And too many people just look at, oh my goodness, we're at a new peak. Well, first of all, we have inflation. Second of all, we have lower interest rates. So what you really want to look at is the payment. And is the average payment in line with the average income? And if that's the case, then you have some room to go. Now, we know that interest rates are going up,
right?
But at some point they will slow down again, because the whole point of the Fed raising interest rates is to slow down the economy. And when you slow down the economy, then rates go back down. Mm-hmm. So I don't think people have to worry that we're going to have the kind of interest rates that we had in the 80s that were in the double digits. Our economy simply cannot handle those kind of interest rates. It would combust. So the Fed would do what they need to do to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's very manipulated, very controlled. So I'm not worried about interest rates getting out of control. So I would say, if you're concerned at all about whether or not your market's in a bubble, check out what the average home price at maybe a 6% interest rate would be. And if that is still affordable for the average income, then I think you're fine. A lot of people say, California, you can't, it's a bubble. Well, San Francisco might be, because I'm not sure that payment is anywhere near what anyone can afford. But in parts of LA, you'd be surprised. It's actually still affordable. Parts of San Diego, definitely the Inland Empire. My daughter's bought a house in Northern California. So there's still opportunity wherever you are. You just maybe can't be downtown.
Well, that's a great point, because, Andres and I, that's how we started working together, is we do, some projects in Philadelphia. So if someone said, okay, is the Philadelphia market tapped? Is a bubble happening, and is it just getting overpriced? But then the next question is, what part of Philadelphia, right? So certain parts of Philadelphia have happened in our newest projects in an area that is shifting. So it's still affordable. So I think that's just a great point, Kathy. It's like people get really focused on Texas, or it's such a micro, areas. I mean, that's what you really have to study. I mean, I was also going to ask you a question around building a team that's across the country. So here you are in California. You decide to start investing in Texas. I'm sure you visited, obviously, and got acclimated to the area, but how did you get some, as they say, boots on the ground? How did you start building your team? I'm sure you have team members, so to speak, everywhere in terms of where you're investing. How did you do that? How did you make that pivot, and how did you trust them? And again, that's the biggest part in this business, right? Because everyone in that area is going to be like, oh, my area is great, come invest,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So I'm just curious, how did you navigate that?
I did it the hard way. I had no idea what I was doing. So I went and found a real estate agent. And, I got off the plane and she picked me up in her nice car and, had waters and, whatever. It's perfect hair. And she said, okay, where do you want to go to to this really nice neighborhood that the Californians love? The median home, like the homes are around 400,000. I was like, come on, lady. Like, sorry, this just fell out of my ear. I just thought you got to be kidding me. Like, I'm not that naive. Like, I know that you have better deals. So she literally goes, how many would you like to buy today?
Wow.
I was like, none. And I left. And then I just thought, okay, how can I find a good agent? And I'm just really lucky that I thought, probably from a property manager. If they're the ones who are going to be managing the properties for me, I'm just going to call every single property manager and meet with every single one of them while I'm here, not waste my time with realtors. Now, I am a realtor, so no, I'm really not trying to put down other realtors. I can just tell you that my guess is 90%, 80%, a very high percentage of real estate agents do not invest and don't understand it. They throw out numbers that they think sound good. Maybe it's better today because there's more education, but at least back then, no. And so I thought, boy, I don't want to get my advice from someone who hasn't done it, So then I went and just met with all the property managers. I started to learn where the rental demand is. I got educated on rental rates and where the growth was. And I'll tell you, property managers give you a ton of information. They're not all good. Most are not. And back then they were mostly all not good, but today the systems have improved. But what they did give me was a lot of information. They would have maps and show where the demand and the calls and the growth and the jobs and all this. And so, and then I would just, I think at the time, just look for an agent in that area, or they would refer somebody.